I want to ask you something before we start. Do you know what most people do the moment they save their first $100,000? They celebrate. They feel like they made it. They upgrade the car, post about it somewhere, maybe tell a few people at dinner. And within 18 months, 70 to 80% of them, depending on the study you read, have less money than when they started. I have watched this pattern repeat so many times I stopped being surprised by it. Here is what I also know. Jewish families, statistically, do not follow that pattern, and I do not mean that in a vague cultural sense. I mean it in a documented, generational, traceable sense that goes back centuries, not just to Wall Street, not just to the Rothschilds or the Goldmans, but to a specific body of law and discipline that was written down long before any of those family names meant anything. My name is Rabbi Ben Ezra. I am a practicing rabbi. I am also a businessman. I have run companies. I have raised capital. I have sat across the table from investors, partners, bankers, and founders. And I want to tell you that the principles I am about to share are not abstract theology. They are operational. They are the exact framework that built some of the most durable family wealth in American history, and they are available to anyone willing to sit down and actually study them. Today I am going to walk you through the 5 things Jewish families never do with their first $100,000. Not 5 things you should do. 5 things you must refuse to do, because the discipline of refusal in this tradition is considered the foundation of everything that comes after. Stay with me. The third one is going to change how you look at your savings account. The first thing Jewish families never do with their first $100,000 is put it all in one place. I need you to hear that not as a cliché about diversification, because diversification has become such a generic financial buzzword that it has lost almost all of its force. I want you to hear it as something closer to a law, because in the Talmud it actually is. In Bava Metzia, Tractate 42a, the rabbis of the Talmudic era set down what may be the oldest recorded investment allocation rule in human history. The teaching is attributed to Rabbi Yitzchak, and it goes like this. A man should always divide his money into 3 parts, 1/3 in land, 1/3 in business, and 1/3 he should keep in reserve, in liquid form, accessible. 1/3 in land, 1/3 in business, 1/3 in cash. That is it. That is the rule. Written down roughly 1,500 years ago. Now, I have sat with fund managers who have run billions of dollars in assets under management, and when I recite that passage to them, more than a few have gone quiet. Because what Rabbi Yitzchak described is not just sensible, it is structurally close to what modern portfolio theory arrived at independently after centuries of data collection and academic research. The rabbis did not have hedge funds. They did not have spreadsheets. What they had was a community that survived dispossession repeatedly. Exile from Spain in 1492, forced migrations across Europe, generations of having property confiscated without warning. And what they understood from hard experience is that concentration is fragility. The person whose entire net worth sits in one asset, one business, one account, is one event away from starting over. Let me make the rule practical, because the beauty of Bava Metzia is that it is not a feeling, it is an instruction you can execute on a Tuesday afternoon. First, the land third. For most of you, that is not literal farmland. It is the appreciating, durable store of value, a home you control, a rental position, an index of real businesses you hold for 10 years and do not touch. Second, the business third. That is capital working actively, your own enterprise, a stake in someone else's, the inventory or equipment that produces income while you sleep. Third, the reserve. And the rabbis were specific about this. The reserve is not an investment that you tell yourself is safe. It is cash. It is liquid. It is the third you can put your hands on within 48 hours when the 7 lean years arrive without an invitation. When Marcus Goldman arrived in New York in 1869, As a German Jewish immigrant with essentially nothing, he did not pour everything into one bet. He started by carrying commercial paper, short-term promissory notes, in the inside pocket of his coat, walking between merchants and banks on Pine Street, earning a small spread on each transaction. He was effectively operating as a market maker for short-term credit. By the time his son-in-law Samuel Sachs joined him to form Goldman Sachs, the firm already operated across multiple distinct financial functions. That diversification across functions, products, and client types was not accidental. It was the model. Here is what I want you to do with your first $100,000. Before you touch it, before you move a dollar, write 3 columns on a piece of paper. Productive assets, things that generate cash flow, appreciating stores, real estate index positions, things that hold value over time, and liquid reserve, accessible within 48 hours, no penalty, no lockup. Then decide how much goes into each column, and do not deviate until your situation materially changes. The rabbis called concentration a form of arrogance, the assumption that you know exactly which single asset will perform. Arrogance in business is expensive. Humility is compounding. The second thing Jewish families never do with their first $100,000 is carry high-interest consumer debt alongside it. This one sounds obvious until you realize how many people do exactly this. They save $100,000 in a brokerage account, earning 7 or 8% per year, while simultaneously carrying a credit card balance at 22%. That is not wealth building. That is running a bucket with a hole in the bottom. The Talmudic and biblical understanding of debt is unambiguous. In Mishlei, Proverbs, chapter 22, verse 7, King Solomon writes, and I want to give you the full weight of who is speaking here. Because Solomon was not a monk, he was the wealthiest sovereign in the region. Solomon writes, the rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender, not a servant, not an employee, a slave. That framing is intentional. The Hebrew word used is eved, which in the Torah refers to total subordination of will. Solomon is not making a polite suggestion about interest rates. He is saying that the moment you owe money at terms you cannot control, you have surrendered the autonomy of your decisions to someone else. Jewish families that have accumulated generational wealth are remarkably consistent on this point. They treat consumer debt, credit cards, personal loans, buy now, pay later arrangements as an emergency condition, not a lifestyle tool. They do not park $100,000 in savings while paying 18% interest on a car loan. They eliminate the debt first. I want to offer you a refusal frame here. When you have your first $100,000, the correct question is not, where do I invest this? The correct question is, do I have any outstanding obligation that is costing me more than what I can reliably earn? If the answer is yes, that debt elimination is the investment. Paying off a 22% credit card is a guaranteed 22% return. Show me a hedge fund with a guaranteed 22% annual return, and I will show you a fraud. The credit card payoff is real, it is immediate, and it compounds in reverse from the moment you execute it. Let me give you the order of operations, because most people get it backward. Step 1. List every obligation you carry by interest rate, highest at the top, not by balance. The rate is what is eating you, not the size. Step 2. Draw a line at the rate you can reliably earn after tax. Call it 8%. Step 3. Every debt above that line gets attacked before a single dollar goes into a new investment. Step 4. You keep 1 month of expenses untouched while you do this, so an emergency does not push you straight back onto the card you just cleared. That is the whole method. There is no clever instrument hiding behind it. It is arithmetic and refusal. The discipline here is also psychological. A family that enters the next phase of wealth building with no high interest obligations has freedom of movement. They can wait for the right opportunity. They are not forced sellers. They are not making decisions under pressure. That freedom is worth more than the nominal return on any single investment. Before I go to the third one, I want to tell you why the next thing on this list is the one that quietly destroys more first fortunes than any market crash ever has. Markets recover. Reputation among the wrong people does not. Stay with me. The third thing Jewish families never do with their first $100,000 is flaunt it. I want to spend a moment on this one because it is the most countercultural thing I am going to say, and it is also the one that I believe causes the most financial damage to people who ignore it. There is a concept in Jewish tradition called ayin hara, literally, the evil eye. I know that phrase sounds folkloric, even superstitious to modern ears, but I want to strip away the mystical layer and give you the rational core of it, because the rational core is completely sound. The Talmud in Tractate Taanit 8b contains a statement that blessing is not found in something that has been weighed, measured, or counted in the open, meaning in that which is exposed and publicly tallied, but only in that which is hidden from the eye. The teaching is that what you advertise, you invite competition for. What you display, you invite resentment toward. What you announce, you invite manipulation around. In practical terms, when you tell people you have $100,000, you attract lenders who want to be borrowers, promoters who want partners, family members who suddenly need help, and people you barely know offering you opportunities. None of that serves you. The wealthiest Jewish families I have studied, and the ones I have met personally in business, have a near universal habit. They live well below what they could visibly afford, not because they are miserly, because they understand that the display of wealth is a liability, not an asset. It signals to the market that you are a target rather than a player. The Lehman family, who started as cotton traders in Montgomery, Alabama in 1844, before eventually relocating to New York and co-founding what would become one of the most powerful financial institutions in American history, did not build that across 4 generations by making their balance sheet a public document. As Stephen Birmingham documented in Our Crowd, his meticulous study of the great German Jewish banking families of New York, the social code of these families was essentially the opposite of American nouveau riche culture. They competed to appear modest. Their clubs, their neighborhoods, their social customs all operated on the principle that visible wealth was a sign of poor judgment. Birmingham describes how these same families, the Lehmans, the Goldmans, the Saxes, the Leibs, the Schiffs, intermarried, banked together, and quietly built an entire parallel financial establishment over decades, and almost none of it was loud. The loudness was for the people who would lose it in a generation. The quiet was for the people who intended to keep it for 4. Think about that, competing to appear modest as a signal of intelligence. What I recommend to you is simple. Your first $100,000 does not need a social media announcement. It does not need a new watch. It does not need a conversation at the dinner table. It needs a spreadsheet and a plan. And if you want a single rule of thumb, it is this: let your money be counted by you in private and by no one in public. The thing that is weighed in the open does not grow. The thing that is hidden does. The fourth thing Jewish families never do with their first $100,000 is skip the tithe. I understand that for secular viewers, this can feel like a religious obligation being smuggled into a financial conversation. I want to argue the opposite. I want to argue that ma'aser, the Jewish tithing practice, is one of the most financially disciplined habits a wealth builder can adopt, and its function is as much psychological and structural as it is spiritual. In Devarim, Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 22, the commandment reads, Asa ta'azaret kol tevuat zarecha, you shall surely tithe all the produce of your seed. The doubling of the root word, asa ta'asa, is a grammatical intensification in Hebrew. indicating certainty and repetition. You will tithe, and you will tithe again. The tradition of Ma'aser Kesafim, monetary tithing of 10% of income, is practiced with extraordinary consistency among observant Jewish families, including wealthy ones. The question most people ask is why, given that it mathematically reduces your deployable capital. The answer the rabbis give is counterintuitive. The practice of giving away a fixed percentage first, before spending, before investing, trains you to operate at 90% of your income as though it were 100%. That habit, the discipline of a hard ceiling on what you consider available, is one of the most powerful financial behaviors that exists. Every financial planner in the world will tell you to pay yourself first, to automate savings, to treat the savings contribution as a non-negotiable expense. Me'ezer is that principle applied with religious-grade certainty. It removes the negotiation. There is no month where you decide the tithe is optional because the car needs a repair. It comes out first. That is the discipline. There is a deeper layer in the text that most people miss. The same legal tradition that commands the tithe of the produce of the field scales the obligation to your means. A wealthy man and a poor man tithe by the same percentage, not the same amount. The principle is proportionality. It is the original flat structure. The rule does not change when your income changes. Only the figure does. That is exactly the structure you want governing your savings rate and your giving rate for the rest of your life. Fixed percentage, variable dollars, no renegotiation. Let me tell you what I have observed in business. The founders and executives I have worked with, who practice some version of structured giving, whether religiously motivated or not, consistently make better capital allocation decisions than those who do not. I believe the mechanism is this. When you regularly and deliberately give away a fixed portion of money, you stop relating to money as identity. It becomes a tool. Tools are used well. Identity is defended irrationally. The first $100,000 is the precise moment to establish this habit. Not at $1 million. Not once you can afford it. Now, the percentage matters less than the consistency. 10% is the traditional number. Even 5%, applied without exception, will restructure your relationship with capital in a way that compounds over decades. The fifth thing Jewish families never do with their first $100,000 is wait to learn. I want to be careful with how I say this, because it could be misread as encouragement to act impulsively. That is the opposite of what I mean. What I mean is this: in the Talmudic framework, study and action are not sequential. They are simultaneous. You do not study for 20 years and then act. You act, you study the outcome, you consult, you adjust. The great Talmudic academies, the yeshivot, were not designed to produce people who knew everything before they did anything. They were designed to produce people who knew how to argue from first principles under conditions of uncertainty, because uncertainty is the permanent condition of both scholarship and business. Consider the story of Joseph in Bereshit, Genesis chapter 41. Joseph is 30 years old when Pharaoh pulls him from prison to interpret a dream. He has no staff, no resources, no institutional backing. He is given the interpretation of 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine, and immediately, not after a planning period, not after consulting advisors, he offers Pharaoh an operational plan. He says, appoint a discerning and wise man. Store 1/5 of the produce of the 7 good years in reserve under Pharaoh's authority, and create a distribution system for the lean years. Notice what Joseph did. He did not just interpret, he engineered a solution in real time. And the solution was structurally identical to Bava Metzia's 1/3 rule: reserve capital, staged deployment, central oversight. Joseph was not lucky. He was trained to think about resource allocation under uncertainty, and when the moment came, he acted without paralysis. The trap I see most often with people who have their first $100,000 is what I call the research spiral. They spend 6 months reading articles, watching videos, listening to podcasts, and at the end of it, they are more confused than when they started, because every source contradicts the next. They are waiting to feel ready, and the market does not care about readiness. The Talmud contains a phrase, in several places, in different contexts, that translates roughly as, "Go out and see what the people are doing." It is an instruction to learn empirically, from observation of the real world, not only from text. The greatest rabbinical authorities in history were also merchants, doctors, craftsmen. They applied law to life in real time. That integration is the model. With your first $100,000, you do not need to know everything. You need to know enough to make a defensible first decision, execute it, observe what happens, and refine. The Talmudic framework for this is called chazara, return and review. You make a ruling, it goes into practice, you see the outcome, you revisit it at the next session. That is also called portfolio management. Let me make this concrete so you do not leave it as a slogan. The defensible first decision does not have to be large. Put a fixed, survivable amount to work this month into the most boring, most diversified, lowest cost position you can find. Then write down in one sentence what you expect it to do and why. In 90 days, return to that sentence. Were you right? Were you wrong? What did you learn that no article could have told you? That 90-day loop, run honestly 4 times a year, will teach you more than 4 years of reading, because it is your money, your decision, and your observed outcome. That is chazara. That is the yeshiva method applied to a brokerage account. The failure mode is not investing too early. The failure mode is spending the years when compounding could have been working on you in a state of preparation that never ends. Let me bring all 5 of these together, because I want you to leave this video with a framework you can actually use, not just a list. The 5 things Jewish families never do with their first $100,000 are, they never concentrate it in one place, because Bava Metzia 42a codified diversification 1500 years before modern finance discovered it. They never carry high-interest consumer debt alongside it, because Mishlei 22:7 established that the borrower is slave to the lender, and a slave cannot build. They never flaunt it, because Taanit 8b understood that blessing lives in what is hidden, not in what is weighed and counted in public. They never skip the tithe, because Devarim 14:22 established that giving first trains you to operate on less, and that discipline is the foundation of every other financial habit. And they never wait until they know everything, because Joseph in Genesis 41 demonstrated that a discerning mind in motion outperforms a brilliant mind in preparation. Here is what I want you to do this week, not this month, this week. Write down which of these 5 things you are currently doing, or failing to refuse. One of them, I guarantee you, is quietly costing you, not just money, trajectory. Then write down one decision, one that you will make in the next 7 days based on what you heard tonight. If you have high-interest debt, decide today how many months until it is gone. If you have all your capital in one account, open the second account this week. If you have been announcing your financial progress publicly, go quiet for 90 days and watch what changes. Every billionaire I named tonight read this chapter before any deal. You just read it for free. If this kind of thinking interests you, the place where ancient law meets real capital formation, subscribe. Because every week, I bring you another teaching that has been sitting in these texts for centuries, waiting for someone to do the work of translating it into language a builder can actually use. Next time, I want to talk about a principle from the Talmud that the wealthiest Jewish families use to evaluate every partnership before they sign, the exact test they apply to a potential partner's character before a single dollar changes hands. and why most business disasters could have been avoided if the parties had simply applied it on day one. Come back for that. It will be worth your time.